A quiet street in winter, the kind of silence that wraps around your coat and breathes into your bones. Street lamps still flicker under the weight of lingering night. Snow crunches under slow steps. The sky is the color of cooled ash, and in the middle of it all, a single golden window glows like a heartbeat, the bakery. Inside, light spills onto the sidewalk, fogs the glass. A sandwich wrapped in parchment slides across the worn wooden counter into hands rough and waiting. No words, just a nod, just the rustle of paper, then the sound of footsteps, and nothing more. Grace moves like breath inside the bakery, her fingers white with flour, her hair pinned back in the same way her mother used to wear it. She's in her mid-30s, her face soft with the kind of beauty that doesn't ask for attention. The bakery, named Rosemary and Rye, belonged to her mother once, and before that to her grandmother. The tiles are chipped in places, the cuckoo clock on the back wall sticks at 6:47 every morning, and that's when Grace begins to hum old jazz tunes, Chet Baker mostly. Music that her mother used to play on the radio in the early mornings, when the world was still waking. She hums as she kneads, as she watches the dough rise like a breath held long. Each morning, she makes exactly one extra sandwich. Roasted vegetables or turkey and cranberry, depending on what's left from the day before. She wraps it with care, adds a napkin, and sets it by the side door that opens to the alley. It's not something she talks about. Her two part-time assistants assume it's just extra stock. They don't ask. Grace doesn't tell. The man has been coming for almost a year now. Always early, always silent. A quiet exchange in the hush before the world begins its noise. She's never seen his full face. He stays in shadow, wrapped in a brown coat too big for his frame, a scarf wrapped tight around his neck. She sees his hands, though, weather-beaten, knuckles split, nails short and clean. When she hears the Dr. Click, she knows he's come and gone, until one day in December, when the frost lays thick on the window and the coffee steams like incense, he breaks the silence. Thanks. His voice is low, rough with disuse. It stops her mid-motion. She glances up, startled. He doesn't meet her eyes. Just nods, turns, and disappears into the alley fog. That night, she doesn't sleep. It changes something. Not much. Not loudly. But enough that she starts noticing things, like how she sets the sandwich down more gently now. How she lingers by the door, pretending to rearrange the broom or the salt box, just to catch the sound of his steps. Her morning ritual becomes more than just routine. It's prayer. Rising before the sun, shaping dough with the reverence of memory. She wipes her hands on her apron and checks the clock that never works. When she folds the sandwich, she folds it like a letter, creases sharp, corners aligned. The alley door groans slightly when she opens it. She places the sandwich on the low bench beneath the overhang. A moment of stillness. Then the click of the door behind her. She never tells her coworkers. It's too sacred, too unspoken. In a world that demands receipts for kindness, Grace prefers this quiet giving. It fits her. Just like her red scarf, always knotted the same way, or the way she mutters recipes under her breath when she's alone. The man, if he has a name, keeps it guarded. To her, he is simply the man in the coat. To himself, he isn't sure who he is anymore. He was someone once, a brother, a son, a boy who liked trains and blueberry muffins. He remembers the ocean more than he remembers names. But each morning, when he finds the sandwich there, still warm, he feels a flicker of dignity, of memory, of being seen. He watches her sometimes from across the street, tucked behind the vending machine near the post office. Watches how she tucks hair behind, her ear, how she lifts her face to the light with closed eyes. He knows she has tired hands. He knows she works too hard. He never speaks again. Not for a long time. Then, one late January morning, long after the Christmas lights have gone stale and the snow has turned to slush, there is something new. Grace finds it when she returns from her early delivery run. The shop smells like cinnamon and lemon rind. The door creaks as usual, but on the counter, nestled between a flour tin and the jar of honey sticks, is a folded piece of paper. It's yellowed. Around the edges, folded crisply in half. Her name is not on it. There is no envelope. She opens it with floured fingers. The handwriting is jagged, but steady. For the warmth you gave without knowing my cold. Thank you. M. She reads it once, then again, and again. She doesn't cry like people do in movies, with heaving sobs or dramatic music. Her tears fall softly, like flour from her hands, like sugar from a spoon. She presses the note flat, places it gently inside her mother's old recipe book, between lemon shortbread and rye toast. Then she wipes her hands, ties her apron tighter, and begins to bake. Winter turned to spring with the patience only time can afford. The city's edges softened as frost gave way to puddles, and the bakery's small garden, dead for months, surprised her with crocus tips one March morning. Each day still began, in the same rhythm, before the first bus groaned past, before the sun lifted the fog. The extra sandwich, made with care, wrapped in parchment and string, was left on the bench by the alley door. The thermos came later, first with hot broth in winter, then coffee, black and strong, when spring stretched into heat. Grace never waited, never looked, but she always checked later. The sandwich was always gone, sometimes the thermos too, but nothing else. No words, no knocks. Just that quiet, deliberate taking. In summer, when the mornings were already hot before the ovens even started, she began freezing the thermos the night before. He still came at the same time, early enough to avoid people, to avoid her. By then, she no longer felt startled when she caught a glimpse of his coat's frayed edge rounding the alley's mouth. She never tried to speak. Their silence wasn't empty anymore. It had shape, like something sculpted gently over years. She came. To rely on it the way she relied on her bread rising, autumn came with its golden breath. Leaves scattered over the alley tiles like confetti. The sandwich now came with a folded napkin tucked just so, cinnamon or apple added to the filling when the season allowed. And then one morning, as the sky bruised pale blue and the kettle hissed low, she opened the back door and found the sandwich, gone. And something else left behind. A tiny crane, meticulously folded from parchment. The kind of fold that takes time, that requires fingertips to press each crease into memory. It sat neatly on the bench where the thermos had rested. She picked it up, slowly, unsure of its message. It had no note, no explanation, just that shape. Fragile, improbable, quiet. The next day, another crane, then another. Soon, they were stacked, in a tiny, perfect line. 5, then 9. She began collecting them in an old jelly jar and kept them near the bread starter next to the window. Her assistants finally asked, curious but not intrusive. "A regular," she said. "Just a quiet one." In December, snow returned. That day, she packed a small tin of her mother's cinnamon cookies with the sandwich and placed it next to the thermos. She left a note. "You might like cinnamon." The next morning, the tin was gone. By noon, it was returned, washed, spotless, placed, exactly where she had left it. No reply, no new crane. But that was answer enough. There were mornings Grace didn't feel like baking, mornings when the weight of sleep pulled too hard, when the world outside the fogged glass felt gray and too loud. But even on those days, the sandwich was made, the thermos filled, left on the bench. She never thought of it as a favor anymore. Then came the night her mother passed. It was quiet. In the apartment above the bakery, where her mother had been slipping away like candlelight. Grace closed the bakery for 3 days. No posted sign. Just darkness behind the glass and silence in the alley. On the 4th day, she returned to the kitchen and turned on the lights. She made no sandwich that morning, but she checked the alley anyway. Nothing. The next morning she did. Make the sandwich? It disappeared like always, but no crane was left. For days, the space on the bench was bare after his visits. Then, quietly, A note appeared, folded in half and weighed down with a clean stone. I'm sorry for your silence. I know that kind of quiet. No name, no signature, just understanding. Deep and spare. Grace read it once, then again. She slipped it into a small tin box she kept under the counter, beside the other note he'd left months ago. Days moved forward as they do. Her grief settled into a quieter room inside her. She found herself humming again, though softer, sometimes stopping mid-phrase. The jelly jar now held nearly 24 cranes. One rainy morning, the sky spilling water in soft sheets down the alley. She opened the door expecting the usual rhythm. The sandwich was taken, but this time he hadn't gone yet. He stood just beyond the gate, under the rusted overhang. Damp shoulders. The same too large coat. She froze in the doorway. He didn't. Look at her. Michael, he said. It wasn't loud. It was as if he had handed her the word instead of speaking it. She said nothing. Not right away. Instead, she nodded once and gently closed the door. That afternoon, she wrapped the sandwich like always, but took a pen and wrote one word on the top layer of parchment. Grace. She handed it to him in the alley, their hands brushing briefly. He glanced down at it. No words. But he tucked the wrapper carefully into his pocket before walking away. Another quiet passed between them after that, but it was different now, gentler, weighted with names. She began writing hers on the wrapper every time. He never wrote back, but he always kept them. Then came the bundle. It was early spring again, a crisp morning thick with birdsong. The bakery had just started offering lavender shortbread again. Grace found no crane that morning. Instead, there was a small, neatly wrapped package tied with string and brown paper. She opened it cautiously, a leather-bound journal, soft, scuffed. She flipped to the first page, then the next. The handwriting was familiar now, tight but controlled, like someone who had once written often but had gone years without needing to. The journal wasn't a story. Not exactly. It was fragments. A paragraph here, a half page there, some just single lines. I was a Marine. I messed up. Lost friends in a blink. Can't forget their names. Came back. Wasn't me anymore. Found the alley before. I found a reason. Some pages trailed off mid-sentence. Others were dense with ink, like he'd been fighting to get something out and gave up halfway through. She read every page, then read them again. She kept the journal under the register, beneath. The old bakery ledger. Never spoke of it. Never asked him anything. But the next morning, the sandwich came with a note folded into the wrapper. Today is lavender. I hope you still like it. He never acknowledged the note, but she saw the tiniest smear of cookie on the thermos lid the next morning. Spring swelled into the kind of summer that made everything sweat. Even the floors of the bakery seemed to sigh under the weight of heat. But the rhythm held. The sandwich, the thermos, the bench. Sometimes a crane. Sometimes not. Always quiet. Until one day, he was gone. She opened the alley door, and everything was still. The sandwich stayed on the bench that day, and the next. A week passed, then a month. The sandwich began disappearing again, but she saw the birds take it, their wings flashing quick in the morning light. No cranes, no notes, nothing but space. Still, she made the sandwich. Every day, wrapped it with the same care. Wrote Grace on the wrapper and placed it on the bench. The tin box under the counter now held 3 notes and a pressed crane she had decided to keep. The journal remained beneath the register. Unread now, but untouched. She never spoke of him again. But every time she folded parchment into corners and edges, she felt the echo of something that had mattered, and sometimes, when she swept the alley at dusk, she found herself looking down the street just a little longer than necessary. 5 years had passed. Grace still woke before the sun, still dusted her hands with flour before brushing her teeth. Her hair had silver now, curling just at her ears, and she tied it back in the same soft knot each morning. The bakery had doubled in size. Her name, once written in simple chalk on the door, now curled in painted script over wide glass windows. A second oven had been installed, and a part-time girl named May took care of the register in the afternoons. Grace was engaged. David was a quiet man, tall and thoughtful, a high school literature teacher who read poetry aloud at night, even when she was too tired to listen, even when she fell asleep halfway through Neruda. He smelled of old books and Earl Grey and always set her teacup on a cloth napkin. She liked that he never raised his voice. He wore glasses not because he needed them, but because he liked how the world looked a little softer through them. They met when he came in to order lemon tarts for his classroom, a reward, he said, for a student who had finally spoken up in class. She asked him what the student had said. He smiled and replied, "He asked me if I believed in mercy." It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something solid, like two stones settling beside one another in a stream bed. The proposal came on a spring afternoon beneath a wide ash tree just beyond the bakery's alley. Grace had taken her sandwich and sat beside him on the bench. They often shared during slow hours. She didn't notice the envelope until he handed her the paper sack. It was tucked inside. She opened it, expecting a book order or maybe one of his lesson plans, and found a handwritten recipe. In his careful slanted script, "Marry me muffins. Yield 2. Bake until golden and hopeful." She blinked, looked at him, and he smiled with that quiet way of his. Not a single soul around them, not a ring in sight, just muffins and a question that had waited its time. "Yes," she said, and kissed his ink-stained fingers. The wedding would be small. Grace insisted on baking the cake herself, a 3-tiered lemon and lavender confection with sugared petals. She chose a courtyard near the bakery, a place lined with ivy-covered walls and lanterns that would glow golden when dusk came. Her dress was simple, ivory cotton stitched with a thin line of blue along the hem, her mother's favorite color. David wore a vest and no tie. He hated ties. They planned slowly, kindly. There was no rush. Every decision was gentle. No chaos. No arguments. Just lists on the fridge and sticky notes on their bedside tables. David wanted 3 songs. Grace picked 4. David insisted she not worry about seating charts. She made one anyway. Names carefully inked beside every plate. One afternoon, while organizing strings of hanging lights in a dusty box from the attic, Grace found the tin box. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside, folded notes, the first still faint with cinnamon scent. And beneath them, the leather-bound journal, its cover cracked now at the edges. She didn't read it all. Just one page. Just one sentence. "If I ever find myself again, I hope someone will know I tried." She held the book in her hands. Ran, her fingers over the words as though they might lift and become air. Then she stood, walked downstairs, and retrieved an extra chair from the bakery's back room. She placed it beside the others, just outside the main circle. David noticed it a few nights later while going over final arrangements. "Who's the chair for?" he asked gently. She hesitated only a moment. "An old friend, someone I used to feed." He nodded. That's reason enough. She loved him for that. The morning of the wedding came clear and soft, like pages turning in a breeze. The courtyard filled with the scent of warm bread and jasmine strung through the ivy walls. Guests arrived in linen and lace, murmuring greetings, brushing confetti from their shoulders. Grace stood at the edge of the garden, breath steady, heart quiet. She wore her mother's comb in her hair. The lace of her dress brushed the ground like waves. May handed her a bouquet, lilacs and rosemary. The music began. She walked slowly, steadily, every step a whisper. Her eyes swept the courtyard, gentle and open. She glanced at the chair. Empty. But just as David took her hand, just as the minister opened his book, there was a stir near the garden gate. A rustle, like wind through a tight grove of trees, shoes against gravel, breath held all at once. Grace turned. 12 men walked in, single file, silent, measured. Each wore the deep blue of Marine dress uniform, medals pinned in neat rows. Their faces unreadable, no music, no sound. One by one, they walked past the guests and paused before the empty chair. Each man raised his hand in salute, a gesture crisp, exact, reverent, and each one turned, looked at Grace, and gave a small nod before taking a seat. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She only held David's hand a little tighter and breathed in as if the world had just shifted on its axis. The ceremony continued, but the chair, still empty, held a presence that filled the garden more than any guest. The ceremony continued, though Grace's vision blurred with tears. She stood still, hand in David's, but her heart was no longer in the garden courtyard. It had wandered somewhere far away, to another bench, another voice, a boy who once looked at bread like it was salvation. Silent sobs rolled down her cheeks, unbidden. Her lips didn't move, but her soul cracked quietly. Guests clapped softly when the minister announced them husband and wife. David leaned in, whispered something sweet she couldn't quite hear, and kissed her cheek. She smiled, nodded, held, his hand tighter than she ever had. Then, after the toasts and laughter and the first bite of cake, the Marine who had walked in first stepped forward. He stood with perfect posture, hat tucked under one arm, solemn. "Mrs. Callow," he said, and the name sounded foreign to her ears. She turned to him, still wiping beneath her eyes. He offered a small envelope, yellowed slightly with time. Its seal dark with wax. "We served with Michael," he said. "He spoke of you often, said your sandwiches saved his life." Grace didn't speak. She took the envelope and pressed it to her chest like a holy thing. That night, with the guests gone and the lights dimmed, Grace sat by candlelight in the kitchen of her bakery. Her dress was folded over the back of a chair, her hair loose. David had fallen asleep upstairs. It had been a long, strange, beautiful day. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter inside was written in bold, slanted script, a little messy, a little familiar. The paper smelled faintly of coffee and rain. "Grace, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I'm sorry. I tried. I wanted to come home. I wanted to walk in with clean shoes and a folded flag and tell you how right you were about the cinnamon. But war has a way of keeping people, even when they want to leave. Still, I need you to know this. I held on to something real. To you. Not in a weird way. Not in some romantic, wild movie kind of way. I just mean, you saw me. When I was nothing but bone and noise and shame, you handed me bread like I mattered. You fed me like I was already saved. I kept your notes. Every one of them. Folded them into my boots. Read them before patrols. I told the guys that a woman back home baked magic into her crust. Some of them believed me. I wanted to come back and tell you thank you in person. To sit at your counter and pay full price. And ask about your day. But if I can't, then let this be enough. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for feeding me when I was too ashamed to ask. Thank you for your silence, your crusty bread, your soft humming. You were the kindest part of my story. In the end, I found my way home. Not in geography, but in spirit. I helped a few others. I got clean. I wrote some of the pain out. I'm not who I was on that first day in your alley. And even if no one else remembers me, you will. And that's enough. Grace, if I have a legacy, let it be this. Someone saved me with flour and patience. And I paid it forward. Tell your husband he's lucky. And if you ever name a muffin after me, make it a little burnt. I always liked the crust. With more gratitude than I ever said aloud, Michael. She read it. Twice, then a third time. Candlelight flickering gently against the page. She didn't sob. Instead, the grief moved through her like waves pulling at tide-smoothed stones. Soft gasps, breath caught and released. Gratitude and sorrow braided together in silence. Her hand pressed to her lips. the paper trembling slightly in her lap. Outside, the wind picked up. Lanterns danced on their cords. Inside, Grace closed her eyes and whispered his name once, like a prayer. The next morning, the Marines returned. They didn't knock, just walked into the bakery as if they belonged. She was already kneading dough, flour dusting her cheeks. They sat in the corner booth and drank black coffee, still in uniform. No one said much at first. Then one spoke, a lanky man with a scar under his eye. "He changed," he said. "Michael. He didn't just get clean. He made it his mission to help others. Taught writing at the recovery center. Bought sandwiches. For new recruits." Another Marine laughed. "He told us this story about a baker who saved him. Said you never asked him for anything. That you were the only safe place he had when he didn't trust safe places." Grace smiled. "I was just feeding someone hungry." "No," the first man replied. "You gave him dignity. That's rarer." They stayed until the scones ran out. Before they left, one of them left a folded photo on the counter. 12 Marines in a desert somewhere, arms around each other, sun glaring behind them. Michael stood in the center, smiling, strong. That night, Grace opened the tin box again. She unfolded every old note, ran her fingers across the edges, remembered his handwriting and the early days when he'd barely meet her eyes. Then she gently placed the final letter atop the others. Closed the lid. She didn't cry this time. She clicked the lock shut and slid the tin behind the bakery counter, next to the spare keys and the ledger book. It stayed there. Years passed. The bakery thrived. Grace's hair turned white, and David read poetry with a magnifier now. Children came in for sugar bread and left with napkins full of advice. One summer afternoon, a little girl climbed onto the stool near the register and pointed to the photo on the wall, the one with 12 men in uniform. "Who are the men?" "In the picture?" she asked. Grace paused, looked at the photo, then at the tin box. "They were here for someone I once fed," she said gently. The girl nodded, like that made perfect sense. Sunlight poured through the windows. Grace turned back, to knead her dough, humming softly. The camera lingered on the tin box behind the counter, then faded to warm, golden light.